Chapter 10-12. The commoners who lived near the western city gate of Yong County discovered a strange matter these few days. Usually there wouldn't be many people passing by. In fact, most of the time the city gates weren't even open. However, there was a huge commotion at the foot of the city walls. At first, they thought that the officials had nothing better to do and wanted to repair the city walls because they had too much money to spend. Later on, they heard that they wanted to build a shopping mall, or something like a business district. They didn't know what exactly a shopping mall or business district was, but they roughly understood the meaning. The newly appointed provincial governor drew a large circle on the western city wall, planning to build a row of shops here. As for why they didn't build on the streets and insisted on surrounding the city gates, they attributed it to the provincial governor having a mental problem. Yong County already had a market square, and it was enough for the commoners to use daily. Why did the provincial governor want to waste manpower and money to build a bigger one? If this wasn't a mental problem, what was? But thinking about it carefully, it couldn't be said to be wasting manpower and money. After all, not only were the commoners not asking for money this time, those who came here to work could even receive 20 copper coins a day. That was 20 copper coins. To the commoners who only relied on farming for a living, it would take them a long time to earn it. This was like a copper coin falling from the sky. Coincidentally, it was the slack season now. If they didn't want to do such a good job, they would be as crazy as the provincial governor. For a period of time, the doorsill of the Yong County government office would be trampled by people every 2 days. The people who came were all commoners who wanted to work on the western city wall. After registering at the government office and being led by a bailiff, they would be able to receive 20 copper coins on the same day. The officials didn't reject any commoners who wanted to work. They would take in as many as they came. There was no helping it. The construction period was tight and the tasks were heavy. Those shops had to be opened before the new year. Right now there were only 3 months before the new year. In other words, they would need at most 2 months to finish the work. Otherwise, from the officials to the bailiffs, everyone would be punished. It was said that this was the idea of the newly appointed provincial governor Chin. The commoners were happy that they could earn money during the slack season, but the officials of Yong County didn't dare to say anything. They could only secretly curse that provincial governor Chin in their hearts. They had seen superiors who liked to cause trouble, but they had never seen one who could cause trouble like this. The officials and bailiffs of the workshops were responsible for supervising the construction of this project. Because they didn't have enough manpower, they had to borrow people from the other branches. Apart from the workers, the officials of the household were also having a hard time. They didn't know what was wrong with provincial governor Chin, but he wanted them to keep all the merchants in Suzhou as much as possible. This wasn't like supervising the construction of a house. Without a silver tongue and perseverance, it was impossible to do this kind of work. A bailiff of the Bureau of Revenue had just sent off a caravan. When he walked back to the city gate, he pursed his lips, which had become dry from talking too much. He couldn't help but curse in a low voice, "Provincial Governor Chin, damn it!" As soon as he raised his head, he saw a guard at the city gate looking at him. He exchanged glances with the guard and shook his head, saying, "Provincial Governor Chin has racked his brains for the sake of the commoners of Shu Province. I wonder if his mother's health is good." Yong County East City Gate. A group of merchants stopped outside the city gates. The leader of the group, a rich man, turned around and said to a bald man behind him, "Brothers, thank you for your help along the way." The bald man waved his hand and said, "There's no need to thank us. If you want to cooperate in the future, you can look for us. You know how to contact us, right?" I know. The rich man nodded and said, "When we return, we will look for you brothers." The bald man nodded and waved his hand, saying, "All right, see you later. Brothers, have a safe journey." After bidding farewell to the others, the rich man looked at the city gate of Yong County and couldn't help but smile. Ever since the fringe became easier to travel, they had to save a lot of money. According to the merchants they met on the way, the bandits in Shu Province had been completely eradicated. They no longer had to worry about all the goods and money they had spent so much effort to travel from the Qi Kingdom to Shu Province. In the future they could travel boldly on the road to Shu Province. From the fringe to Shu Province the people were good and the road was good. Whenever he saw the bald man, he would feel a sense of familiarity. This sense of familiarity immediately disappeared when he saw a man in a government uniform walking towards them. They could hide from the kingdom of Qi, but they could not hide from the kingdom of Jing. Suzhou was a place that they could not avoid. The tariff here was so strict that it was enough to make many small merchants shrink back. "Sir." The rich man smiled apologetically. Just as he was about to speak, the officer quickly walked over with a smile and asked, "Are you merchants from the Qi Kingdom?" The rich man's heart skipped a beat when he saw the officer, who had always been cold and expressionless, reveal such a terrifying smile on his face. There must be something wrong with this unusual situation. This officer was smiling so brightly. It seemed that they were in big trouble this time. He was nervous and said, "Sir, hey, don't be so polite. Come in, come in." The officer's smile became even brighter as he led them into the county. The rich man was even more nervous. Whether it was in the Jing kingdom or the Qi kingdom, the government always set up checkpoints to collect taxes. The Qi kingdom severely suppressed business. The tax rate was 2 out of 10. As for what was 2 out of 10, it was also decided by the officials. Therefore, in the Qi kingdom, it was very difficult to do business without an official background. Ever since the reform of the Jing state's tax laws, under the condition that agriculture was stable, merchants weren't suppressed as much as they were in the Qi state. Instead, they were guided and encouraged to a certain extent. Therefore, more and more merchants from the Qi state were willing to do business in the Jing state. Of course, the people of the Qi kingdom in the Jing kingdom was different from the people of the Jing kingdom in the Jing kingdom. Merchants in the Jing kingdom paid 1 out of 20 taxes. They had to pay 1 out of 10 taxes. Of course, it was still more cost-effective than in the Qi kingdom. When they arrived at the official warehouse, the officer gave him a list after checking the goods. He was already used to this process. The list contained the total number of goods and the taxes they had to pay. The officer's attitude just now made him very nervous. He guessed that the tax laws in the Jing kingdom had been changed again. He was afraid that this trip would be in vain. However, when he saw the taxes at the bottom of the list, he couldn't help but be stunned. In the Qi kingdom, the government would value the goods and then convert them into silver. They would deliberately raise the price of the goods to increase the taxes of the merchants. In fact, the government everywhere did this. The only difference was that each was more black-hearted than the other. However, the number written on the list was more than half of what he expected. He had always paid more taxes. This was the first time that he encountered a situation where he paid less taxes. There was a trap, there must be a trap somewhere. Thinking of the officer's attitude, he was even more certain. This was a test. Must be a test. If he was greedy and pretended not to know about this and tried to deceive them, he might lose both his life and money this time. He looked at the officer and said with a serious face, "Your Excellency, we didn't hide any goods. These few carts are all we have. There's no problem with the valuation on the list. But the taxes, Your Excellency, could it be? Could it be possible that Your Excellency made a mistake in the calculation?" Looking at the officer's expression, he didn't wait for him to speak. He immediately said, "Of course, Your Excellency, please don't misunderstand me. I absolutely didn't mean to criticize Your Excellency. Please don't blame me." Chapter 10:13. Wrong calculation? The officer was stunned. He looked at him, shook his head and said with a smile, "No, the calculation is not wrong. The provincial governor has ordered that from now on, the merchants of the Qi kingdom will be treated the same as those of the Jing kingdom. Your tax will be calculated according to the new system, no more and no less." The wealthy-looking man was rooted to the spot. The merchants of the Qi kingdom will be treated the same as those of the Jing kingdom? Were you kidding? Even if you want to deceive me, you don't need to use such a poor excuse. This is the Jing kingdom. How can the people of the Qi kingdom and the people of the Jing kingdom be treated the same? I'm afraid that they will arrest me for tax evasion as soon as I pay the tax. I haven't been here for half a year, but the officials of Shuzhou have become more and more evil. He looked at the official, his legs went soft and he knelt on the ground with a thud. With snot and tears running down his face, he cried, "Sir, I beg you to let this lowly one go. This lowly one has an 80-year-old mother and an 8-year-old child. If anything happens to this batch of goods, this lowly one's family will have nothing to eat this winter." The officer's eyes were also a little wet when he saw him crying bitterly. He also had an old mother to support, a little child to feed, and a squandering wife to spend money like water. For the sake of his mother's cooking, his child's snacks, and his wife's perfume, for the sake of this month's performance, for the generous bonus, for the sake of a fat new year, he had to clench his teeth and hold on even if he had to talk until his mouth broke. They were all in the same boat. Why should they make things difficult for each other? He helped the merchant of the Qi kingdom up and said seriously, "You don't believe me, right? Come, I'll take you to see the notice. It's written clearly on the notice. If you still don't believe me, I'll take you to see the county magistrate and let him tell you personally. Provincial Governor Qin is really a bastard." The officer cursed in his heart when he led the merchant of the Qi kingdom to see the notice. If it wasn't for the strict order of the provincial governor, He should be sitting at the door of the household and basking in the sun instead of arguing with the merchant of the Qi kingdom here, provincial governor's manor. Qin Chong, who was flipping through the files, suddenly sneezed. Third Miss Qin, who had just left the room, walked back in and reminded him, the weather is slowly turning cold. Second brother, wear more clothes. Don't catch a cold. Qin Chong put down the file and nodded with a smile. I understand. At the same time, the low-ranking official led the merchants of the Qi kingdom out of the county yamen. The petty official looked at the merchants of the Qi kingdom and said, this is Shuzhou. Thanks to His Royal Highness Jiang of Silla's benevolence, he knows that it's not easy for you to travel far and wide. That's why he gives you such preferential treatment. You won't get such good policies anywhere else. Big brother official, I'm really sorry. I've gauged the heart of a gentleman with my own mean measure. The merchant of the Qi kingdom looked at the official apologetically and apologized. At this moment he finally let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. He even felt a little light under his feet. The fringe was no longer so chaotic. Shuzhou was no longer plagued by bandits. Even the officials of the Jing kingdom treated the merchants as human beings and gave them so much convenience. Wouldn't their business get smoother and smoother in the future? It's a small matter, a small matter. The low-ranking official looked at him and asked, where are you going on this trip? The wealthy-looking man smiled and said, we're going to Qing Prefecture first. When the time comes, we'll turn to the water route to the capital and sell these goods. Then we'll buy some things from the Jing kingdom and bring them back to earn some hard-earned money. Many merchants of the Qi kingdom made money in the same way as them. They sold their goods at two different places and earned a price difference. The price difference was not to be underestimated. If they were lucky, the profit from this trip would be enough to make up for 2 whole years of their stay in the Qi kingdom. They were in the cloth business in the Qi kingdom. Relying on the secret dyeing recipes passed down in their family, they had accumulated some family wealth. Initially, their business in the Qi kingdom was doing well. However, ever since the high-grade cloth from the Jing kingdom flowed into the Qi kingdom and started to lead the fashion, their business was greatly affected. Left with no choice, they could only become a traveling merchant. They traveled from the Qi kingdom to the Jing kingdom, passing through prefectures and prefectures. Fortunately, their cloth was unique. Even if they brought it back to the Jing kingdom, it would still be extremely popular. In the Jing kingdom, they also had regular business partners. It's not easy for you to travel all over the country. The low-ranking official looked at him and said, since you'll be leaving in 2 days, it's fate that we've met. Why don't I treat you to a meal? The merchant of the Qi kingdom looked at the low-ranking official and suddenly felt tears welling up in his eyes. When they were doing business in the Qi kingdom, the officials wanted nothing more than to extract all the oil from their bodies and pay taxes. However, when they were in another country, not only did the government voluntarily help them lower their taxes, the officials even wanted to treat them to a meal. Comparing the two, in this Shu prefecture, he actually felt like he was at home. He sniffed and looked at the low-ranking official. He said solemnly, don't thank you for your kindness. I'll treat you to a meal. May I ask which is the best restaurant here? How could I? The low-ranking official shook his head and pointed diagonally across from the yamen. That's it. The rich man raised his head and saw that diagonally across from the yamen, the words Rujia Restaurant were clearly visible on the plaque. In a private room on the second floor of the Rujia Restaurant, the two men chatted for a long time after 3 rounds of wine. The low-ranking official looked at the rich man and asked, I heard from brother Hu that you've come this time to buy cloth and clothing from the Jing kingdom. May I ask, are these things only available in Qing Prefecture and the capital? That's not it. The merchant of the Qi kingdom shook his head and said, Brother Nye, you don't know this. Although other prefectures sell these things, we need a lot of them. You can only buy them in the capital and Qing Prefecture. The low-ranking official shook his head and said, the one who doesn't know is you, Brother Hu. Let me put it this way. Whatever you can buy in Qing Prefecture and the capital, you can buy it in Shuzhou. Whatever you can't buy in Qing Prefecture and the capital, you can buy it in Shuzhou. The merchant of the Qi kingdom was stunned. He asked, why is that? Of course it's because His Highness Jiang of Silla has come. The low-ranking official waved his hand and said, let's eat first. When we're done, I'll show you around and you'll know. All right, Brother Nye, I'll drink to you first. Cheers. After a while, the merchant of the Qi kingdom stood at the western gate and looked at the crowd working in full swing. He asked in astonishment, Brother Nye, what are you doing? Are you building the city walls? This isn't building the city walls. The low-ranking official shook his head and said, look, this circle of unbuilt buildings are all shops and workshops. They'll be finished in another 2 months. The higher-ups have said that this will be a shopping mall in the future. There are shops selling cloth, clothes, restaurants, cloth shops and inns. He looked at the merchant of the Qi Kingdom and said, even you can rent a shop here. There are merchants from all over the world here. If you want to buy something, you don't have to travel all the way from Shuzhou to the capital. Whatever the capital has, you can find here. Is that true? The eyes of the merchant of the Qi Kingdom lit up when he heard this. For merchants like them, if they could skip the trip to the capital, they would not only save time and travel expenses, but they would also greatly reduce the risk. If they calculated it carefully, they could save more than half of their expenses. Moreover, time was money. Saving time was making money. The time they had to go to the capital was enough for them to make several trips between Shuzhou and the Qi Kingdom. The difference in profits between the two was several times. Not only that, the government of the Jing Kingdom also allowed the people of the Qi Kingdom to open shops here. From the information he got from Brother Nye, it was obvious that Shuzhou encouraged and supported business. This was rare in other places. It was also a great attraction for merchants from all over the world. If this shopping mall was built with Shuzhou as the center, it would definitely be a place where merchants from the Qi Kingdom, Jing Kingdom, and Wu Kingdom would fight for. If they could open a shop here, it would be like making money sitting on the ground. Chapter 10:14. The merchant's eyes flickered as if he could already see mountains of gold and silver flashing before his eyes. He looked at the petty official and asked, Big Brother Nye, do you think I can rent a shop here as well? First come, first served. You can reserve it after paying the deposit. The petty official looked at him and said, Today is fine, but in a few days there might not be any space left. The merchant from the Qi Kingdom immediately said, Thank you, Brother Nye. Where can I pay the deposit? I'll go now. The petty official waved his hand and said, No need to thank me. It's all because of the good policies. The merchant from the Qi Kingdom shook his head repeatedly. If not for you, Brother Nye, I would already be on my way to the capital. How could I encounter such a good thing? After paying the deposit, I'll reward you handsomely. There were still a few more to go for this month's sales. The petty official thought for a moment and said, If you really want to thank me, introduce some of your merchant friends to me. After paying the deposit, the merchant from the Qi Kingdom came out from the registration area of the yamen. Once again he bowed respectfully to the petty official and said seriously, I can't thank you enough. If Brother Nye needs anything in the future, please don't hesitate to ask. I won't refuse. You're too kind. The petty official waved his hand and said, Don't you want to buy cloth? I'll take you to the cloth workshop. I heard that the cloth workshop in the capital is the same one in our Shuzhou. Take a look first. The merchant from the Qi Kingdom cupped his hands and said, All right. I'll have to trouble Brother Nye again. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly heard the sound of an argument. That's clearly my customer. How dare you fight with me? What do you mean by your customer? Who told you to walk so slowly? Your sales for this month are enough. Can't you let me have one? Who wouldn't want to live with money? The merchant from the Qi Kingdom watched as the two yamen runners dragged each other into the yamen. He looked at the petty official and asked, Brother Nye, this is. The petty official waved his hand and said, Don't worry about them. Let's go on our. Although it was the slack season for farming, the people of Yong County were living quite a fulfilling life. Every day before dawn, the strong men in the village would form groups of 5 or 10 and go to the prefectural city to build houses. At noon they would be provided with a meal of noodles. Once they were full, they would return at night. Their wages would be 20 copper coins a day, paid on a daily basis. They couldn't even earn 20 copper coins a day from farming. They didn't have any other skills, but they had plenty of physical strength. They could earn 20 copper coins a day, and every few days they could still make up their minds to buy a pot of wine and 2 taels of meat to eat. Wu Laosan was one of them. The reason why he was called Wu Laosan was that he was the 3rd child in his family. He had 2 older brothers before him. One died not long after he was born, and the other was killed by bandits more than 10 years ago. He was the only one left in the old Wu family. Thinking of this, he felt that it was a pity. Second brother didn't have the luck to die early. Otherwise, he would have been able to witness this world without thieves. His Highness Jianghu of Silla was the best. He did such a great thing for the people of Shuzhou. It was just that he wasn't a good judge of character. He found a provincial governor who was sick in the head. He built shops at the city gate, and he even built them in a circle. But thinking about it carefully, if this provincial governor was normal, he wouldn't earn 20 copper coins a day, and he wouldn't have the money to buy candied fruits from Su Fuji for his wife. Therefore he found a provincial governor who was sick in the head. His Highness Jianghu of Silla was the best. Speaking of his wife, she had been with him for so long, but she didn't have any good fortune. When the family was in dire straits, she had to weave cloth to make money to support the family. It was really hard for her. He took out the candied fruits that he spent 10 copper coins to buy today, pushed open the door and said loudly, "First mother, I'm back." A woman walked out of the room and said, "You're back. Come in quickly. I'll cook immediately." Wu Laosen walked in and asked with a frown, "Where did you go today? Why are you only cooking now?" The woman said softly, "Today the cloth shop in the city is recruiting people. I asked Third Aunt to accompany me to take a look. The cloth shop is recruiting people. Why did you go there?" Wu Laosen frowned and said, "You're a woman. Why don't you stay at home? Don't run around all day." He threw a paper bag on the table and said, "When it comes to earning money, us men will do it. Can you women earn 20 copper coins a day? This is the candied fruit that I bought from Su Fuji today. Try it. If you like it, I'll buy it for you in a few days." "I know." The woman opened the paper bag and said softly. Wu Laosen took a cold steamed bun and ate it. He asked casually, "Oh right, how much does the cloth shop pay you every day?" 300 copper coins. Wu Laosen took a bite of the steamed bun. His expression froze. He looked at her and asked in a muffled voice, "How much? 3 copper coins?" The woman took a bite of the candied fruit and said softly, "Everyone else pays 30 copper coins. I showed them the cloth that I used to weave. They said that I was good at weaving and the flowers were beautiful. They asked me to teach them how to weave. They paid me 300 copper coins a day." Wu Laosen was stunned for a while. He grabbed the kettle and gulped down the steamed bun. He put down the kettle and slammed the table. He said loudly, "You're a woman. Don't you feel bored staying at home all day? There's a chance you should go out and see more. Where's the cloth shop you mentioned? Bring me there tomorrow. They only hire women. Don't I know that they only hire women?" Wu Laosen looked at her and said seriously, "I'm looking for you to see if they're lying. Women like you are the easiest to be deceived. No, that's the workshop of the Jianghu of Silla. They won't lie." Wu Laosen looked at her and then at the paper bag in her hand. He put the cold steamed bun aside and pursed his lips. He said, "Come, let me try a piece of the candied fruit." The pandemonium. Fang Yu put down a piece of paper and said, "Building a shop? What is this Li Yi doing?" He turned to look at the man in purple and asked, "Is the news true?" The man in purple nodded and said, "I've asked the local people. They want to build a shopping mall there. It's said that they'll be opening before the new year." They had lost contact with the messengers of the holy religion in charge of Shu province. This meant that they couldn't contact the believers in Shu province. If they wanted to obtain information, they could only ask the local people. Fang Yu frowned and murmured, "Why does it have to be the West Gate? Are you stupid? There are 4 gates in the east, west, south, and north. Only the West Gate is the most useless. It's not open all year round. If they didn't choose the West Gate, would they choose the other 3? The king of Shu walked over from the side and looked at him. He said, "You may not know this, but Li Yi's greatest strength is not in governing the country but in business. He should be making a good profit during the New Year's festival. Didn't he find a way to keep those merchants in Shuzhou?" Fang Yu shook his head. "I'm just worried. There's nothing to worry about." The king of Shu shook his head and said, "There are 3,000 soldiers stationed in Shu province. Yong County can only mobilize 2,000 soldiers at most. They're just a bunch of stragglers and are nothing to be afraid of. As long as your people can open the city gates, no one can stop us." "I know." Fang Yu shook his head and said, "But it's better to be careful." The king of Shu shook his head and revealed an excited expression. He said, "I think it's best to wait until after the Lantern Festival to make a move. When he has earned enough money, we can slaughter a fat sheep." Chapter 10:15. The king of Shu postponed the day of action for half a month. Before the Lantern Festival, Li Yi could only accept it passively. He couldn't force him to do it with a knife on his neck, which would be too inhumane. Everyone had problems to discuss, express their opinions and compromise with each other. This was the way to solve problems. For example, he helped him plan the time and route. He thought it was better to take action after the Spring Festival. He also thought what he said made sense. They would meet at the Lantern Festival and the matter was settled. The following things were much easier. If Shuzhou wanted to develop, the first thing to get rid of was the closed or outdated policies after eliminating the corrupt officials, bandits, and the unstable factor of the king of Shu. At present, for ordinary people in Shuzhou, agriculture was still the most important and basic. It was related to whether they could have enough to eat and whether they would be hungry. On this basis, it was necessary to emphasize that industry, agriculture, and commerce should go hand in hand and develop together. That was what they had been doing these days. They lowered the tariff, attracted investment, cancelled the curfew, opened the night market, built workshops, and provided a large number of jobs for idle women at home. The goods produced in the workshops were sold to merchants from other countries. Xuzhou would become the first special economic zone in the Jing kingdom. Walking Rui and watching on the streets of Yong County again, it was quite different from a few months ago. The streets of Yong County used to be dirty and messy. Garbage could be seen everywhere and sewage ditches were everywhere. When they passed some roads they had to cover their mouths and noses. Now the streets were cleaned by professionals. Although it was not spotless, at least it was not dirty and messy anymore. Of course, the Yong County government did this not only to implement the provincial governor's policy. Since the reform of the tariff and commercial laws in Xuzhou, it attracted merchants from the Jing kingdom, the Qi kingdom, and even the Wu kingdom in a short period of time. Xuzhou's geographical location was special. It was the place where these merchants had to pass to and from other countries. Now, after the reform of the commercial laws, no other state was more friendly to these merchants than Xuzhou. Every day there were goods from all over the world converging here. There was no need to travel everywhere. Anything they wanted to buy could be found in Yong County. Free trade. The merchants weren't the only ones who were happy. The officials of Yong County were even happier. Although the tax rate for foreign businessmen has been reduced, the total tax amount has increased tenfold. Those businessmen came here to rent shops, land, and workshops. Although they can't touch these silvers, they are still happy to see them. What's more, these silvers would eventually be used in Shu province. This included their bonuses. With a little performance, just the year-end bonus alone would be equivalent to a year's salary. Before this, they had thought that the new provincial governor Chen had lost his mind. Only now did they realize that it was His Highness Jiang of Silla who had a unique vision and foresight. I heard that His Highness Jiang of Silla is about to get married. I heard about it. In a few days, all the brothels in the city will have free performances for 3 days. Now we can watch to our heart's content. His Highness has only been in Shu province for a few months, but the officials have already become better. There are no more bandits. Life is changing day by day. My wife works in the cloth shop and can earn 30 copper coins a day. I only earn a few copper coins after working so hard every day. Sigh, you can just laugh secretly. We have been waiting for the stars and the moon for so many years before His Highness finally came. This time, we have to show our appreciation for His Highness's wedding. We have almost accumulated a basket of eggs at home. Although they aren't worth much, it can be considered a small token of our appreciation. Li Yi hadn't shown her face in public many times. Therefore, she could walk with Rui and Ruoqing on the street without worrying about being recognized. Rui had said before that she wanted to pass down the kung fu of the Lu family. Li Yi asked Ruoqing to pick a dozen girls of the right age from the brothels. Now that she had nothing to do, she would teach them kung fu. Of course, she would also bring Drunken Mo and Ruoqing with her. Although Drunken Mo and Ruoqing had long passed the age of learning kung fu, and their achievements in this life were limited, it was impossible for them to become masters like her or even Mississippi Lu, who could dominate the martial arts world. However, with a master teaching them, their progress would not be slow. On the contrary, it made Li Yi, who had always been lazy, feel some pressure. If they became more powerful, it would be difficult for him to be a husband again. Ruoqing was fine, but with Drunken Mo's temper, it was hard to say what would happen after marriage. In the end, who would be on top and who would be on the bottom, who would be active and who would be passive. However, a man should be flexible, so he didn't need to care about these things. Drunken Mo's wedding dress had been embroidered a long time ago. Now that the former emperor had passed away, the 1-year period was about to pass. At the beginning of next year, it would be time to return the wedding that he owed them. Beside a small stall by the roadside, Rui and Ruoqing walked over, picked up an exquisite hairpin, and inserted it into Ruoqing's hair, saying, "This hairpin matches my sister quite well." Li looked at it. This hairpin was indeed exquisite. Judging from its style, it didn't seem to be from the Jing kingdom. Now in Yong County, merchants from all over the world gathered, and any small stall on the street could buy a lot of good things. Beside the two of them, another woman also picked up a hairpin. She turned around and said to a man in a yamen uniform, "Husband, this hairpin is beautiful." "I want this one." The official frowned and said, "Didn't I just buy one for you yesterday? Why do you want it?" The woman grabbed his arm, shook it hard and said angrily, "No, I want it, I want it, I want it." Okay, the official hurriedly agreed. Now when he heard her say, I want it, his legs would unconsciously go soft. What was a night of love worth 1,000 gold? It was all a lie. She was a good girl before marriage, how could she become like this after marriage? Habitually holding his waist, he looked at the merchant and asked, How much is this hairpin? You really have a good eye. Seeing him pick the hairpin, the merchant's eyes lit up and said, This is the hairpin that Empress Wendy wore on her head when she committed suicide. It's a priceless treasure. Who are you lying to? Which empress committed suicide? If you talk nonsense again, I'll take you to the officials. The official glared at him. If it weren't for the county magistrate asking them to treat these merchants better, the lies he had just fabricated were enough to make him shed a layer of skin. It's Empress Wendy of the Wu Kingdom. The merchant hurriedly shook his head and said, Sir, you can take a closer look. This style, this material, it's really a real royal thing. If it weren't for the fact that this is the Jing Kingdom, I wouldn't dare to sell it. The official looked at him and shook his head, saying, Just tell me how much it is. 1,000 taels. The merchant from the Wu Kingdom looked at him and said, I might as well tell you the truth. This hairpin is the relic of Empress Wendy of the Wu Kingdom. I only dare to sell it here. 1,000 taels, no lower. Let's go. The official took the woman's hand and turned around to leave. 1,000 taels? 1,000 taels? He had to think about it. 1,000 taels? Even if he sold himself, it wouldn't be enough. The woman also knew that they couldn't afford it. After looking at it longingly, she could only sigh and leave. Sir, don't go. Don't go. Seeing that they were about to leave, the merchant from the Wu Kingdom immediately said, Another 2 taels, 998, how about 998? Hey sir, another 598, 498, 498. Wait. Li picked up the hairpin just now, looked at the merchant from the Wu Kingdom and asked, You said that this is the relic of Empress Wendy of the Wu Kingdom. Do you have any proof? The merchant from the Wu Kingdom was stunned. He did not expect that after one person left, another person would come. The young master in front of him seemed to be much wealthier than the previous one. Just from the clothes of the 2 female companions beside him, one could tell that. The official who had just turned around and left also stopped after hearing that. He looked back at the back of that person, wanting to see who was so stupid to spend 1,000 taels to buy such a fake. Chapter 10:16. The merchant from the Wu Kingdom looked at him and said with a smile, Sir, you are not an ordinary person at first glance. Whether it belongs to the royal family or not, you will know when you take a closer look. Li could see that this hairpin was not an ordinary one. Except for the queen of a country, it was a big crime for anyone to use a phoenix hairpin. Few people had the guts to forge this hairpin and sell it. Judging from the texture and the fine workmanship, it did seem to belong to the royal family. Seeing his expression, the merchant from the Wu Kingdom was delighted and asked, Young master, is it worth it to buy this hairpin for 1,000 taels of silver? Li glanced at him and put away the hairpin, saying, Didn't you say 498 taels of silver just now? I will give you another 200 taels of silver. So I want this hairpin for 500 taels of silver. Sir, this. The merchant from the Wu Kingdom looked depressed. He really shouldn't have said those words just now. The official obviously didn't want to buy it. He shouted for nothing, but now 500 taels of silver flew away just like that. However, he also knew that it was not easy to sell this thing. It was a profit to have 500 taels of silver. He could only nod helplessly and said with his teeth clenched, 500 taels of silver it is, okay. Behind Li, the woman just now looked at him and curled her lips, saying, 500 taels of silver for such a fake. Are you stupid? The merchant from the Wu Kingdom was furious. He looked at her and said loudly, What fake? Do you think this young master is as ignorant as you are? When the woman was about to speak, she found that the man next to her suddenly pulled her arm. Before she could ask anything, she saw her husband's legs go soft and he knelt down. The official looked pale. Looking at the young man in front of him, he said in a trembling voice, Greetings, Your Highness Jianghu of Silla. I didn't know Your Highness and offended you. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Jing, Your Highness Jianghu of Silla. Hearing that, the woman's face turned pale and she also knelt down with her husband. As for the merchant from the Wu Kingdom, when he knew that the person in front of him was the famous His Highness Jianghu of Silla, he was stunned and his body trembled. Where? His Highness Jianghu of Silla, where is His Highness? I haven't seen what His Highness looks like. I'll pay for the hairpin at the Jianghu of Silla's residence. Seeing that there was already a commotion on the street, Li Yi glanced at the businessman from the Wu kingdom. With one hand holding Rui and the other hand holding Ruoqing, they quickly disappeared into the alley ahead. At first he was the one pulling Rui and Ruoqing as they ran. Later, Rui was the one carrying them on each side as they flew in the sky. Only then did he get rid of the people of Yong County who were rushing over from all directions. He flew back to the Jianghu of Silla mansion and sat in the small courtyard. He took a long time to calm down. In his previous life, he had only seen such a scene when he passed by an airport and saw the fans of a certain A-list celebrity welcoming him. He didn't expect that he would have such a day. It seemed that practicing martial arts was the right choice. If he didn't have the ability to fly in the sky, he might not be able to resist these fans. In addition, he had to urge Ruoqing to practice martial arts, especially to practice lightness skill. The holy religion had 100,000 followers in the Qi kingdom. Thinking of the scene, he was a little scared. Only the queen who could fly could control the scene. After drinking a cup of the new cocktail developed by Xiao Zhu yesterday, he took out the hairpin he had just bought. Li Yi was very familiar with the palace. Therefore, when he saw the hairpin at first sight, he knew it was not an ordinary thing. But he didn't expect that it was worn by Empress Wendy before she died. Empress Wendy was the former empress of the Wu kingdom. After the current emperor of the Wu kingdom killed his brother and father, she committed suicide. Now he was sure that Yang Liuqing was the princess of the Wu kingdom. After the emperor of the Wu kingdom usurped the throne, she fled the palace. Then this Empress Wendy must be Yang Liuqing's mother. Since he saw it, he naturally had to help her put away Empress Wendy's belongings. He would return them to her when he saw them in the future. Several months ago, the news about Yang Liuqing was directly cut off. Of course, it wasn't because something had happened to her. It was just that the Wu kingdom was now full of heroes and chaos. The imperial court wanted to get rid of these people as soon as possible. She was the most important person to pay attention to. If she didn't hide her trace, the imperial court would definitely encircle her. Whether it was the Lu League or the brothel, they had no sources in the Wu kingdom. Even the imperial court of the Wu kingdom couldn't find Yang Liuqing. Of course, it was impossible for Li Yi to find her himself. Recently, Mississippi Lu didn't mention going to the Wu kingdom. The Lu League needed to take root in Suzhou again. As the league leader, she had to deal with many things in person. Of course, more importantly, even if the two of them and the whole Lu League joined forces, they still couldn't compete with a country. Today, Mississippi Lu had already changed her rash temperament. Except for taking action when she disagreed with him, she didn't have that kind of irrational impulse anymore. In retrospect, she had really changed a lot in the past few years. But the biggest change was reflected in her cooking skills. A woman changed 18 times before she grew up, and a fairy fell to the mortal world. He opened the first letter first. It was written by the old granny. She only told him about the current situation of the Li family in the capital. Everything was fine and she told him not to worry. She mentioned that Suzhou was remote and chaotic, and she warned him to be careful when he was outside. Then she asked about Rui, Ruoqing, Zumo, and the others. She even asked about Xuanhuan and Rui. After asking about her baby great-grandson, she told him that they should quickly spread the branches of the Li family. In her lifetime, she still wanted to hold a few more great-grandchildren. And Rui, Ruoqing, Zumo, Rui, and Xuanhuan to spread the branches of the Li family. After all, the old granny was old and muddle-headed. She didn't even notice that something terrible had been mixed in. Chapter 10:17. After reading the old mistress' letter, Li Yi called Xuanhuan over and asked her to show the letter to Rui and the others. The old mistress' letter was not written for him. She did not mention him as much as Rui. The next letter was very short. The handwriting was rather immature. Duanwu had only been learning to read for a few years, so it was already very good that she had made such progress. The little girl used a worried tone to talk about the heavy workload that caused her to have no time to play during this period of time. She also said that the guy called Li Han was always bothering her, which was very annoying. The only time she wasn't annoyed was when he was explaining the math problems to her. For the time being, there were only 3 letters. The last one was naturally Li Xian's. Li Yi opened the envelope. After glancing through it, he shook his head helplessly. Li Xian, this guy, had thrown all the matters of the court to Emingzu. He had gone off to study soap bubbles, leaving Emingzu, a princess, to worry about the empress. And he still had the cheek to ask himself why the bubbles under the sun were colorful. Li Yi looked at Yongning, who was blowing bubbles in soap water to tease Li Duan. Even Yongning knew that it was the interference of light. 2/3 of this guy's letter was actually about this, and based on this he proposed 3 conjectures and 5 hypotheses. He picked up his pen and wrote on the paper, To understand why the soap bubbles under the sun are colorful, we must first understand the wave-particle duality of light. Speaking of the wave-particle duality of light, we must mention the theory of relativity. And before we understand the theory of relativity, we must definitely not bypass quantum theory. When he reached the angle between the direction of vibration of the incident light vector and the direction of polarization of the polarizer, Li could not continue. He then used one sentence to explain the principle of the interference of light, which caused the soap bubbles under the sun to be colorful. He then used a few hundred words to briefly describe the recent events of the past month. He asked about the situation in the capital. He estimated that 5,000 words should be enough. He put a few pieces of paper into an envelope and sealed it. The courier would send it to the capital at the fastest speed of 800 li. He looked at Fang and asked, "Just these 3 letters? Is that all?" Fang shook his head and said, "Only these 3. Li lowered his head and said after a long time, "So be it." Ever since he left the capital, he could only get bits and pieces of information about Emingzu and Shanning from Li Xian's letters. He thought they would write back, but after waiting for so long, there was still no letter. Even the letters he sent were not answered. He still remembered that the day before he left, Emingzu held his hand and asked him if he could stay. He also remembered that the girl ran out of the palace barefoot and cried her heart out. Thus, his anger towards certain people in the capital, which he had managed to quell with great difficulty, rose again. Li Duan watched for a while and didn't want to watch any more. He trotted over, held Li Yi's arm and asked, "Father, Dwainer Mrs. Xiaorui and Xuanhuan. When are we going back to the capital?" At the age of 2, Li Duan could already speak his mind in complete sentences. "In a few more days. In a few more days I will be able to see Xiaorui." Li picked him up and suppressed the anger in his heart. He asked with a smile, "Isn't Xuanhuan at home? Why does Dwainer still miss Xuanhuan?" He only thought that Xuanhuan was what Li Duan called ruaching or zuamo. Perhaps Rui taught him to call her that these days. "Xuanhuan is not at home. Xuanhuan is in the capital." Li Duan shook his head and said, "Xuanhuan will give Dwainer candy figurines to eat." The smile on Li Yi's face froze in an instant. Zuamo and ruaching would not give him candy figurines to eat. The child was still young and eating too much candy was not good for his teeth. He gently put Li Duan down and picked up the letter sent by Li Xian. The letter said that there was a girl who stood on the palace wall every day and looked in the direction of Shuzhou. Every letter he sent would mention this sentence. The letter also said that she would read every letter he sent without missing a word. She was the person who would secretly give Li Duan candy figurines to eat. He lowered his head, touched Li Duan's head and said, "I also want to. When you grow up I will take you back to see her." Li Duan nodded and said, "Then Dwainer should eat well and grow up quickly. When you grow up you will be able to see Xuanhuan." Li Yi's face was a little dazed. There was once a girl who told him that she would eat well, sleep well and do her homework well. She would grow up well and wait for him to come back. What the girl didn't know was that when she said these words she had already grown up. A bunch of bastards. Thinking of the faces of those people in the capital again, thinking of the girl standing opposite him and smiling with tears in her eyes, Li Yi's face darkened and his fists clenched. When Qin Chong saw Li Yi, he knew that someone was going to be in trouble. He stood up from his seat and asked, "What happened?" Li Yi's face darkened. "Write a memorial and hand it in. Say that suppressing bandits in Shuzhou has cost a lot of money and suffered heavy losses. Ask the court to allocate 1,000,000 taels of silver." Qin Chong froze and then looked at him in disbelief. 1,000,000 taels of silver? You're crazy. They won't agree. Li looked at him and asked, "Either they agree to allocate the money or Shuzhou doesn't pay taxes for 50 years. Which do you think they will choose?" Qin Chong didn't need to guess to know which option the people in the capital would choose. Shuzhou had always been poor and full of bandits. Not mentioning paying taxes to the court every year, it could already be considered a good year if it didn't rely on the court's aid and not drag the court down. 1,000,000 taels of silver or non-existent taxes. Even an idiot would know which to choose. The court was full of smart people, so they would definitely choose the second option. The result of choosing this path was that they would be ridiculed by their descendants for 50 years, because the Shuzhou of today was no longer the Shuzhou of yesterday. The Shuzhou of tomorrow was no longer the Shuzhou of today. In the entire world, no one dared to make such a request to the court, but unfortunately the person before him was one of them. The court had to choose one of the 2 options he gave. Once they made a choice they had to abide by it. As long as he was alive he could not go back on his word. The capital, Hibiscus Garden. Li Xian sat by the lake, comfortably lying on a rocking chair. He gazed at the soap bubbles floating in the air, changing colors under the sunlight. A eunuch stood behind him, blowing soap bubbles with great effort. Because he had been blowing for too long, his face was pale, his entire body was dizzy, and he wanted to vomit. Another eunuch ran over from a distance. When he was still several dozen zhang away, he shouted, Your Majesty, Jiang of Silla has replied, Jiang of Silla has replied. He has replied. Li Xian bounced up from the rocking chair, his face lit up with joy, and he strode over. The eunuch who was blowing bubbles felt as if he had been pardoned. He leaned against a tree behind him, breathing in big mouthfuls of fresh air. Li Xian snatched the letter from the eunuch's hand and tore it open carefully. Then he sat back on the rocking chair and started reading. Wave-particle duality of light, general theory of relativity, quantum theory, Schrödinger's cat, Murphy's law, L'Hospital's law. Li Xian stood up from the rocking chair, a thoughtful look on his face. He took the letter back to his room, took out a pen and paper, and started writing and calculating. Sometimes he bit the tip of the pen, his brows furrowed, and sometimes he laughed out loud, slamming the table as if he had gone mad. Was this the theory of relativity? But what did this have to do with his question? After staring blankly on the spot for a long time, his face finally revealed an embarrassed and angry expression. He sat back down and picked up the letter. A moment later, he suddenly slapped the table and said angrily, This deranged fellow, he actually gathered 4,381 words this time. A figure walked in from outside and looked at Li Xian, asking in a low voice, Imperial brother, did teacher send a letter? Li Xian looked at the girl who was quietly standing in front of him with a smile. A trace of heartache flashed across his face as he smiled and said, Yes, he said that Dwainer misses you very much and wants to come back to see you as soon as he grows up. The girl said with a smile, I also miss Dwainer. I wonder if he has grown taller and how many teeth he has grown. I didn't say in this letter. Li Xian took out another letter from the table and handed it to her. He said, This is a letter from him to you. Maybe it's written on it. Oh yes, there's also a letter from your imperial sister. When you return to the palace later, send it to her. Thank you, Brother Xian. She took the letter. At this moment, a small figure ran in from outside. When she ran past the door, she accidentally tripped and fell. Without waiting for the eunuchs and palace maids to help her up, she got up by herself, patted the dirt off her body and ran to Li Xian. She raised her little face and asked, Daddy, is Dwainer back? Li Xian picked her up and said, Dwainer hasn't come back yet. When Xiaorui grows up, Dwainer can come back to play with you? The little girl who had just turned 2 bit her finger and said seriously, Then Xiaorui has to grow up quickly? Somewhere in the palace, the little girl carefully opened the letter with a faint smile on her face. She murmured, Dwainer already has 20 teeth. His height? She stood up and gestured. She murmured, His height is already up to my waist. When he grows up, I won't be able to carry him. She carefully read the letter several times before putting it into an envelope and locking it in an exquisite box. There were already several letters lying in the box. 1 letter every month. There were a total of 8 letters now. In other words, her teacher had been gone for a full 8 months. When she received her teacher's first letter, her heart was filled with joy. She was so happy that she couldn't sleep for a few days. Later she wrote many pages of replies. Her wrists were sore. She had so many things she wanted to say to her teacher. She wanted to drink the soup that her teacher made. She wanted to eat the sugar figurines that her teacher bought for her. She wanted her teacher to put her on his neck to watch the fun. Later, she burned the letters one by one. No amount of paper could finish writing all the things she wanted to say to her teacher. She believed that her teacher knew all the things she wanted to say. I wonder what was written in the letter that he wrote to my sister? She looked at the other letter on the table and picked it up. She walked out of the palace and headed in the direction of the Morning Dew Palace. The Morning Dew Palace. The princess, who had just finished practicing, changed her clothes and bathed, walked back into the palace. She looked at an old man standing in the middle of the palace and asked, 1 year is almost up. What plans does Chief Chang have? Changde raised his head and said, There isn't much to see in the capital anymore. I plan to go take a look outside. This was once His Majesty's long-cherished wish. Now, I can only fulfill it on His Majesty's behalf. Emingzu nodded and didn't say anything else. Changde turned and walked out of the palace. After taking 1 step, he took another step back and asked, I'll ask out of line. What plans does your highness have in the future? Chief Chang. Princess Shaning walked in from outside and nodded slightly at Changde. She then handed the letter to Emingzu and said with a smile, Sister, sir has sent a letter. Emingzu took the letter and then thought of Changda's question. However, when she raised her head to look, there was no one at the palace door. She put the letter away and asked the young girl beside her, "You have to manage the academy and the women's union. If you feel tired, you can put one down first." "I'm not tired." The young girl shook her head and said, "It's good to be busy every day. I can also learn many things that can't be learned from books. Sister, on the other hand, don't be too busy. Sir told me to keep an eye on you and not let you always stay up late. He said that girls who stay up late will age." Emingzu nodded. Every time he wrote to her, he would mention this. He said that girls who stayed up late would age easily and get wrinkles easily. It was easy for their hormones to go haywire, causing irregular menstruation and causing their breasts to shrink. He also said that if she became an old woman in the future, no one would want her. Therefore, she never openly used letters in front of Xianxia. Little girls were not allowed to read them. After he left, she became more and more unscrupulous. However, Shuzhou was thousands of miles away from the capital. Her hands could not reach there. She thought about it, sat down, took a pen and paper and began to write. The young girl walked to the side and asked curiously, "Sister, are you going to reply to Sir?" Emingzi shook her head and said, "This is for your sister Rui." In the Shangshu province, an official slammed the memorial sent by the Shuzhou provincial governor on the table and said angrily, "What an exorbitant demand! 1,000,000 taels of silver. 1,000,000 taels of silver is enough to fight several wars with the Qi kingdom. Why do they need so much money to suppress bandits? Do they think the money in the national treasury comes out of thin air? Such an unreasonable request must not be agreed to." Chapter 1019. The official was referring to a memorial that Qin Chong, the provincial governor of Shuzhou, had just sent over. Everyone was familiar with the name Qin Chong. The Qin clan was once illustrious for a time. Qin Qing was one of the pillars of the imperial court, and Qin Chang's name was known by everyone in the imperial court. Of course, that was the Qin family in the past. Later, the king of Shu lost power and was implicated by the Cui family. The Qin family soon declined. Qin Chong was stripped of his official position and his property was confiscated. He was reduced to opening a cloth shop in the capital to make a living. For a long time, this matter was a topic of discussion among the officials in the imperial court. He thought that the Qin family would never have a chance to rise again in this life, but he didn't expect that in just a year, the Qin family would become the provincial governor of Shuzhou. Shuzhou was the fief of the jianghu of Silla and the most special prince of the Jing kingdom. The imperial court could not interfere with the appointment of the provincial governor of Shuzhou, nor could they criticize him. They accused him of something else. According to the memorial, after the jianghu of Silla arrived in Shuzhou, he launched a vigorous campaign to suppress bandits. All the officials knew that there were many bandits in Shuzhou. For many years, the imperial court and local officials tried to suppress them, but to no avail. As time went by, he took a laissez-faire attitude towards this matter. They did not care whether the jianghu of Silla suppressed the bandits or not. The problem was that if he wanted to suppress bandits, it was just to suppress bandits. Why did he make it seem like he was at war with the Qi kingdom, the Wu kingdom, and the Zhao kingdom at the same time? Although the national treasury had not been so tight for the past 2 years, they could not be so extravagant. This was clearly blackmail. Someone looked up at the indignant official and asked, "Then, Lord Qi, do you think that we should choose the second option? Shuzhou does not pay taxes for 50 years? Although the Shuzhou is the fief of the jianghu of Silla, it is also the land of the Jing kingdom. How can we do this?" Lord Qi waved his hand and said, "We will not choose either of these two options. You can tell this to His Highness the jianghu of Silla and His Majesty." The official shook his head and said no more. His Highness the jianghu of Silla was more favored by His Majesty than the Empress. If this memorial was sent directly to His Majesty, he would probably approve it immediately. Back then they were the ones who had forced King Jing to Shuzhou. Now, if they dared to add insult to injury, even if King Jing was far away in Shuzhou and could not do anything to them, His Majesty would not let them off easily. Because of the departure of the jianghu of Silla, the conflict between them and His Majesty had not been completely resolved. Moreover, this matter was not that difficult to choose. Shuzhou had always been a sore point for the imperial court. Could be said that they did not care about it. It was indeed the territory of the Jing kingdom. But if they did care about it, that place was too chaotic. The imperial court could not reach that far. Its existence was of little value. It would only drag the imperial court down and pull down the per capita GDP of the country. All the data from the Ministry of Revenue could prove this point. It was tasteless, but it was a pity to throw it away. Therefore, when His Majesty conferred Shuzhou to the Jiang of Silla, there was almost no opposition in the imperial court. Even if the Shuzhou did not pay taxes for 50 years, it would not affect the overall situation. That place was so chaotic. It was the Wu Kingdom, the Qi Kingdom, and the land of chaos. It was not easy to throw the blame to the Jiang of Silla, but no one was willing to pick it up again. The two prime ministers were not present, so the ministers had a discussion and finally made a decision. They would submit this memorial to His Majesty and the princess. Li Xian had already gotten rid of the low-level interest of blowing soap bubbles. He held a prism and fiddled with it under the sun. The 2-year-old girl stood beside him and looked at it without blinking. She murmured, "Why hasn't Daddy conjured a rainbow yet?" Uncle Li conjured one so quickly. The little girl clapped her hands happily and ran over to show off to her mother. She was so happy that she finally managed to achieve the dispersion phenomenon. "Mother, Daddy conjured a rainbow for Xiaorui just now." After a while, Wang Qin walked over with the little girl in her arms. Li Xian looked at her and said, "That guy is going to get married soon and he's going to marry two at once. Isn't His Majesty going to get married soon? What's there to be envious about? Are you envious that the Jiang of Silla can marry too?" Wang Qin looked at him and said, "If His Majesty is willing, he can marry more than the Jiang of Silla. In addition to the imperial concubines, he can also have a few more concubines. What are you saying? Am I as fickle and beastly as him?" Li Xian said righteously as he held the mother and daughter in his arms. Wang Qin blushed slightly and gently pinched him. "You're already an emperor, but you're still not serious." "Xiaorui is still here." The little girl covered her eyes and quickly said, "Xiaorui can't see anything, she can't see anything." The family of 3 laughed and played for a while. Then Wang Qin took the little girl to sleep. Li Xian walked back to the hall and opened the memorial at the top. He only glanced at it and used a red brush to circle the words, "Shuzhou will not pay taxes for 50 years. He sighed and said, "I really want to see with my own eyes what you can make Shuzhou look like." The reason he chose this option was not because he was reluctant to part with silver, but because he knew that a mere 1,000,000 taels of silver could not compare to the Shuzhou that he governed. Because if he didn't check the second option, he wouldn't receive any reply next month. More importantly, according to his description, Shuzhou was a good place. It sounded like it was a lot more fun than the capital. Shuzhou, the provincial governor's residence. Chen Chong looked at the imperial edict that Li Yi had delivered and felt his lips go dry. His Majesty had actually agreed. He had agreed to allow Shuzhou to develop freely for these 50 years and not have to pay taxes to the court. This was an imperial edict. The emperor did not joke about it, and there was no such thing as a trifling edict. The officials in court would no longer have the chance to regret it. When it came to Shuzhou, if they wanted to throw it away, they could throw it away. However, Shuzhou was not a place that they could throw away or pick up as they pleased. After today, they could only look at the rich and populous Shuzhou with envy. After following at Li Yi's side for so long, he now seemed to understand why Li Yi had never been willing to enter the court when he was in the capital. Because the people in the court were basically a bunch of pigs. One could imagine what would have happened if the court had not interfered for so many years and allowed Shuzhou to develop freely. The reason he was able to sit step by step in the position of censor was not because of the Qin family. Thus, he could clearly see that in less than 50 years, Shuzhou would become even more prosperous than Qin and Fu and Jingdou. At that time, would they still feel heartache over the 1,000,000 taels of silver? Jiang of Silla Fu. Li looked at Fang and asked, "Other than the imperial edict, is there anything else?" Fang nodded and said, "There is also a letter." Li casually asked, "From Li Xian?" Fang shook his head and said, "From the princess." Li was stunned and asked in disbelief, "Which princess?" "The eldest princess." "Ah." Li suddenly stood up from his seat. "Why didn't you say so earlier that the eldest princess sent a letter? Quick, show it to me." Fang took a step back and shook his head. He said, "The eldest princess did send a letter, but it was not for the son-in-law." Li was stunned on the spot. If the eldest princess's letter was not for him, who else could it be for? To Yongning, to Rui? It couldn't be for Mississippi Lu, could it? Fang looked at him and explained, "This letter was written by the eldest princess to the second young mistress." "What? Emingzu gave it to Rui?" Li was stunned again. Emingzu and Rui, their relationship didn't seem to be so good that they would write letters to each other, right? Besides, he had written so many letters to her, but she didn't reply to any of them. She actually took the initiative to write to Mississippi Lu. This didn't make sense, nor did it make sense. Li shook his head and said, "I don't believe it. Let me have a look." Fang took out the letter from his sleeve and put it on the table. I told you to read more. Li looked at the letter and looked at him with disappointment. He pointed at the words on the envelope and said, Look, it clearly says for Li. Why is it written for Rui? Although you can't read, you can't talk nonsense. Fang looked a little sad and said, Son-in-law, you are insulting me. Although I can't read, I know how to count. For Li is 4 words, for Lu Rui is 5 words. He shook his head and continued, and I asked the courier. This letter is indeed for the second young mistress. Son-in-law, don't lie to me and don't lie to yourself. Li finally understood why Fang's martial arts had stagnated. He was ignorant and incompetent. He was simply ignorant and incompetent. He didn't practice but secretly learned. He obviously didn't know how to count before. Chapter 10:20. Even if she wrote it to Rui, can't I read it? Li took the envelope from his hand and said, What is my relationship with Mingzu and Rui? The 3 of us are like one person. Is it wrong for me to read the letter I wrote to myself? Fang looked at him and said seriously, Young master, I advise you not to read it. Li tore the envelope in front of him and took out the letter. Fang looked at him and did not say anything. He just patted him on the shoulder, sighed and turned to leave. You're getting more and more insensible. Li glanced at him. He took Mingzhu's letter and planned to go back to his room to read it. However, he did not go back. He stood there for a long time and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He opened the letter and handed it to Mississippi Lu and said, This is a letter from Mingzhu to you. I opened it for you. Fang was insensible. He did not know Rui when he saw her, so he opened the letter and handed it to her. After Li handed the letter to Mississippi Lu, he asked thoughtfully, Do you want me to read it for you? Mississippi Lu said indifferently, Read it if you want. That's embarrassing. Li looked at the letter in her hand. Mississippi Lu turned and went back into the house. Li looked at her back and sighed and shook his head. Saying one thing and going back on one's words, Oh women. Li leaned against the pillar and was puzzled. Mingzi did not reply to him. What kind of letter did she write to Rui? Changda and old Taoist Yuan were both gurus, and they were close to each other. In terms of distance and strength, there was no reason for them to ask Mississippi Lu for guidance. It could be said that they were confiding in each other's bosom friends, but they were not bosom friends. They would fight whenever they saw each other. It was impossible for them to chat about their daily lives. Mingzu would never compare who was older with Mississippi Lu in the letter. That would be asking for humiliation. What did they have to say in the letter? Li really couldn't understand. No matter how he thought about it, it was all Fang's fault. In the past he was such a simple, kind and qualified wingman. Ever since he got together with Little Red, he had completely changed. Mingzu had written a letter to Rui, but she hadn't told him in advance. What if what would he do? There was no way he could explain this to Rui, let alone the old emperor. Soon Rui came out of the room. Li pretended to ask casually, What did she say in the letter? Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said lightly, The letter is on the table in the room. If you want to read it, go and read it yourself. I don't want to read it. Li shook his head and walked into her room. He said, The letter you borrowed from me last time? Bah, it's time to return the book you borrowed from me. I'll go and get it myself. The letter was indeed on her desk. When Li walked over, he glanced at it. There were only 2 lines of words. It didn't look like a letter at all. He took a book from the bookshelf. When he walked over, he stopped and finally saw the 2 lines clearly. He teased me. That was the first line. Help me beat him up, I'll help you next time. This was the second line. Li looked at Mississippi Lu, who was standing at the door, and curled his lips. It was fine if she didn't want him to read it, but why did she have to take out a fake letter? She must have written it herself. Mingzu was the princess of a country, and there was no distinction between them. How could she say something like that? What's more, he wrote this letter just to get Rui to beat him up. What's this, Didi call? A clumsy self-directed performance. This Rui was getting more and more out of hand. Ha women? Then he saw the woman begin to close the door. Li Yi's expression changed and he immediately said, You don't really believe what she said, do you? Mississippi Lu didn't say anything and walked straight towards him. Li Yi retreated to the bedside and said, We are a family. Mingzu is still an outsider for the time being. Are you sure you want to listen to her one-sided words? Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, You just said that the 3 of us are like one person and I beat myself up. Is that wrong? Li thought for a moment and said, I was wrong. You used a wrong conclusion and you can only come up with an even more wrong conclusion. I am not you, so beating me up is not the same as beating yourself up. Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, then what is the correct conclusion? You are you, the unique you. Emingzu and I are like one person. If she wants to beat me up, I have nothing to say. Mississippi Lou thought for a moment, looked at him and said, you and Emingzu are like one person, and Li Emingzu and I are also like one person, so you and I are also like one person. Li Yi's eyes widened. How can you two be like one person? Mississippi Lou looked at him and said, I have taken a bath with her. Have you? I have even slept with her. Have you? Li Yi looked at her and said disdainfully. Li Yi remembered that once in the morning dew hall, the two of them were discussing national affairs, and then Emingzu was so sleepy that she fell asleep on his shoulder. He was never afraid of who was closer to Emingzu. She had seen Emingzu take a bath, and he had seen her take a bath. Mississippi Lou was stunned, then looked at him and murmured, you have slept together. When Li Yi walked out of Mississippi Lou's room, Fong was squatting in the yard watching him walk out. Hitting is a sign of affection and scolding is love. Fong looked at him and said, the harder you hit, the deeper the love. You should be content, son-in-law. You should know that Second Miss never treats others like that. Fong was not only ignorant and incompetent, but also shamelessly plagiarized. The shameless Fong looked at Li Yi and said, son-in-law, sit. I'm not sitting. Li Yi shook his head and said, I've been sitting in Rui's room for too long. Fong looked at him and didn't expose him. He thought for a moment and asked, son-in-law, it will be New Year in 2 days and the 15th is coming soon. Should we prepare? A few days earlier. Don't ruin the Lantern Festival. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, the 11th day of the first month is a good day. Tell them to attack on the 11th. Fong thought for a moment and asked, then should we tell Qin Chong to mobilize some troops from other places? Li Yi shook his head and said, no need. The garrison of Yong County is the same as before. They won't be needed this time. It had to be said that the holy religion couldn't be underestimated. Their followers were all hidden in the dark. Other than those people, there were even more hidden spies. From the information obtained so far, they should have already infiltrated the defense of Yong County. If they mobilized the garrison of Shuzhou, they definitely wouldn't be able to cover up all the movements and would definitely alert the enemy. When the king of Shu escaped, it would be difficult to catch him again. Alright, I'll arrange it right away. Fong responded and turned to leave. After Fong left, Li Yi rubbed his buttocks and an extremely depressed expression appeared on his face. Emingzu and Rui were actually in cahoots, writing a letter to Rui from thousands of miles away just to beat him up. More importantly, Rui actually believed her one-sided words and sided with her. Beating them up was a sign of affection and scolding them was a sign of love. Sooner or later, he would settle the scores with those two women and let them know how much he loved them. A love that couldn't be expressed in words. Chapter 1021. As the new year approached, the people of Yong County finally knew what was going on with the newly built shopping mall at the West Gate. Shops, they were all shops. They were too much for one's eyes to take in and they lingered on for a long time. There were restaurants, brothels, inns, cloth stores, clothing stores, music stores, jewelry stores. There was even a market that occupied 5 shops. From now on, they didn't need to travel all over the county just to buy a few things. In this small shopping mall, there was nothing they couldn't think of. In the past, the people living near the West Gate were the poorest people in Yong County. In the past few months, the situation had changed dramatically. Businessmen from all over could no longer rent shops in the shopping mall. Yong County temporarily prohibited foreign businessmen from buying and selling land, so they could only pay high rents to the surrounding people and rent their houses as shops. They immediately became the wealthiest group of people in the county. These people weren't the only ones whose lives had changed. The textile workshops had also provided many ways for the idle women at home to earn money. They could choose to weave at home and sell to the textile workshop, or they could work in the textile workshop for a fixed monthly salary. They could also raise silkworms and sell the silk. The fabrics and clothing of the Jing Kingdom, especially silk, were very popular in all countries. No matter how many goods they produced, they didn't have to worry about not being able to sell them. The tradition of men farming and women weaving didn't change, but the delicate women used their skillful hands to support half of the sky at home. Later research showed that in Yong County, the famous hometown of silk in the Jing Kingdom, the tradition of men living off women and being afraid of their wives originated from this. Although the standard of living had improved, the spending power of the people in Yong County was limited. They still had to rely on these businessmen from all over the country. Even though they had to pay taxes to the local government and the rent for the shops in the shopping mall wasn't cheap, it was still much better than taking the risk of traveling all over the mountains and rivers. Just 2 days after the opening, the shopping mall was already crowded with people. After all, it was stupid not to take advantage of a good deal. Many of the shops in Yong County had opening promotions and year-end clearance sales at the same time. If they missed this opportunity, they would have to wait until next year. 10 coins for all, 10 coins for all. You can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins, you can't buy for 10 coins. The shopkeeper is in a hurry to go home for the new year. He's selling at a loss, selling at a loss. Last 2 days, last 2 days. The shopkeeper ran away with his sister-in-law. We can only use the Rui dew and perfume to pay for our wages. Everything is half price, everything is half price. Whenever a shop advertised like this, there would be an endless stream of customers, causing the surrounding peers to be dumbfounded. 10 copper coins, half price loss. If everyone did business like this, then all the merchants in this world would have starved to death long ago. These businessmen from the Jing kingdom really had no bottom line. Was silver so important that he was willing to throw away his face for it? However, when they looked at the crowded shop and the few people in their shop, the expressions on the others' faces became complicated. Finally, a few of them whispered a few words into the ears of their shop assistants. The assistants hesitated for a moment before walking out of the shop. New store opening, second item half price. Buy 3 get 1 free, buy 5 get 2 free, buy 10 get 5 free. Opening discount. 10 coins will be deducted for every 100 coins. 50 coins will be deducted for every 300 coins. The crowd split into several groups and rushed towards the shops. Amidst the crowd, a man in blue walked out of the shopping mall. He looked back for a long time before turning around and exiting the city gate from another direction. Opposite the shopping mall, on the second floor of a tea house, another man in blue withdrew his gaze and stood up. He respectfully said to the young man opposite him, "Lord Su, this man is Zheng Bang, a blue-clothed messenger of the church. He works under the right emissary, in the land of Bedlam." A man in blue looked at Fang Yu and said, "Guardian, it has been confirmed. That place has indeed been turned into a market. I've seen it with my own eyes. The shops there are doing very well. If we attack from the west gate, we can first rob them of all their goods and money. It's very convenient." Fang Yu lowered his head and thought for a moment. He asked, "Is there any movement in the defense of Yong County?" The man in blue thought for a moment and said, "Nothing out of the ordinary. I've already contacted our spy. He said that there are no signs of movement in the defense of Yong County. If there is any news, he will inform us immediately." Fang Yu nodded and said, "On the 14th of the first month." "That's not appropriate." The king of Shu strode in from outside and said, "Baldy's men are here. They suggest that we attack a few days earlier, on the 11th of the first month. The 15th of the first month is the Lantern Festival. 3 days before that, the defense of the county will definitely be strengthened. It's most suitable to attack on the 11th of the first month. It can minimize the losses." Fang Yu thought for a moment and felt that what the king said made sense. Then he seemed to think of something and frowned. He said, "According to the almanac, it's forbidden to go out on the 11th of the first month." The king of Shu knew that the holy religion was troublesome, but he didn't expect it to be so troublesome. They already had the empress, so why would they still believe in the almanac? He frowned and asked, "Where is the almanac?" Fang Yu pointed to the table. The king of Shu walked over to take a look and picked it up. He smiled and said, "This is this year's. In a few days it'll be next year. This almanac is outdated. It'll be the 11th of the first month." He looked at Fang Yu and said, "I'll send someone to inform those baldies. They'll start preparing now and strive to be foolproof." Fang Yu was silent for a moment and nodded. "All right." The two discussed for a while more before the king of Shu left in a hurry. He stepped out of the door and looked up at the sky. His lips curled into a smile and he said eerily, "Li Yi Jiang of Silla, we'll meet soon. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Aren't you going to get married soon? I'll give you a big gift before your wedding." Inside the house, Fang Yu looked at the person behind him and said, "Go get a new almanac." "Yes, guardian." The person nodded and immediately went out. Soon he came back with a new almanac. The 11th of the first month of the year of Ihai, Ikai. This is the heaven's wish for the holy religion to make Ikai. Fang Yu was very satisfied with this and nodded. He looked at the person and said, "You may leave first." "Yes." The disciple walked out. He still had a little doubt in his heart. The almanac said Ikai, but it didn't say who Ikai was. What if it was Ikai? Somewhere on a mountain in the fringe. Several figures were climbing the mountain path with difficulty. They were panting from exhaustion. I say, why don't we take the main road? Why do we have to climb over the mountains? Don't complain. Although the main road has been repaired by those baldies, it's still better to take shortcuts quickly. If you delay His Highness' business, be careful of your head. Say, do you think that Baldy's place is really as good as they say? A city in the mountains with restaurants, brothels, and even a school? I don't believe it. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. You'll know when you see it with your own eyes. The group was chatting as they climbed the mountain. When they reached a certain point, the view before them suddenly opened up. A clear path led straight to the top of the mountain. As far as the eye could see, there seemed to be the shadows of buildings hidden in the forest. Just as the group took a few steps forward, several arrows suddenly shot out from the forest and stabbed into the ground in front of them. The person walking at the front couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. If those arrows had been a few inches higher, his foot would have been pierced through. Chapter 1022. The Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger. Just as the few of them were shocked, a cold voice came from the forest. On the mountain path, the leader was stunned. When he regained his senses, he immediately said, I know, the pagoda suppresses the river demon. It's the pagoda suppresses the river demon. We're on the same side. Muha. Sawadika. Why are you blushing? Lin Zhong's voice softened as he asked again. That person immediately said, I'm in high spirits. Why is it yellow again? It's a wax to prevent the cold. After a while, a voice came from the forest. Continue forward, there will be someone ahead to receive you. This was considered a code. The few of them were relieved. These baldies were indeed very particular. Before entering the village, they had to memorize so many codes. Moreover, they sounded more powerful, like the slang of bandits. Unlike their own prince, who had learned everything from others and insisted on changing the code to, the king of Shu is not a fish in a pond, he will transform into a dragon in the face of a storm. They were too embarrassed to mention it to others. In comparison, although the code of these baldies was complicated and difficult to remember, it was much more shameless than the king of Shu's. Thank you, brother. One of them cupped his hands at Lin Zhong, and the few of them quickly disappeared on the mountain path. Not long after, another figure slowly walked along the mountain path. When he walked under a tree, he stopped and looked into the forest. His lips moved slightly. Beep beep. He made two sounds, one long and two short sounds. Secret codes like Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger, which had been eliminated by them, were used to distinguish between friend and foe. Their secret codes had long been upgraded and changed every half a month. If an enemy wanted to pretend to be one of their comrades, they would die a horrible death. Beep, beep. He did not stand in place for long. Soon the same response came from the forest. Another youth with a bow and arrow walked out of the forest. He looked at him and nodded, saying, They're back. They're back. That person nodded as well. He took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over, saying, This is the attack plan and route map. Remember to let them bring it when they leave. Send my regards to the king and the alliance master. What's the hurry? It's only a few days. You can ask them yourself. I'm leaving. See you later. After a brief exchange, the young man with the bow and arrow on his back once again hid in the forest, while the figure of the other person also slowly disappeared from the mountain path. At the top of the mountain, the few of them stood on the bluestone paved street and looked at the city in front of them. They were dumbstruck and couldn't take another step forward. Neat streets, rows upon rows of shops, and rows upon rows of neat wooden houses looked exactly the same from the outside. Even outside the fringe, it was rare to see such a scene in the big cities of the Jing kingdom. Compared to the territory of these baldies, the place they lived in was at most a kennel. This was Li Yi's first New Year's Eve in Shuzhou. Although they were far away from the capital, the atmosphere of the new year was even stronger. Perhaps it was because there were fewer social activities, only a simple family. It was just like the pure New Year when he first came here. The only difference was that the people of Shuzhou were too enthusiastic. In just a few days, the jianghu of Silla residents received a few houses full of gifts. Although they weren't valuable, they still represented the people's goodwill. Li Yi also asked the gatekeeper to prepare red envelopes for all the people who came to his residence with gifts. This was considered reciprocity. Shuzhou had already begun to develop rapidly. The lives of the people would get better and better, and their wallets would naturally become more and more full. Although there was still a big gap from the level he had hoped for, some things could not be achieved overnight. It was almost impossible for a state to catch up with the capital without 10 or 20 years of development. All he had to do now was to wait patiently. Fang walked in from outside with an envelope in his hand. After opening it, Li Yi looked at it and said, "So, they have a spy in Yong County who has the ability to secretly open the west gate on the night of the 11th day of the first month?" "That's what they said, but they didn't say who it was." Fang nodded and said, "I've already asked Old Chin to investigate. It's very simple. It's the person who was in charge of guarding the west gate that day." Very soon, people from the provincial governor's estate arrived. Li Yi looked at the things that Qin Qiong had sent over. The officer who was usually in charge of guarding the west gate had been knocked on the head by someone on his way home after drinking last night and was slightly injured. His duty had been temporarily taken over by one of his subordinates. Li Yi put down the paper and said in a small voice, "Captain, son-in-law, I suddenly have an idea," Fang suddenly said after some thought. Li Yi turned his head to look at him. "What idea?" "I think that ambushing people on the walls to shoot arrows, splash boiling oil, throw stones, this is a bit too troublesome." He looked at Li Yi and thought for a moment. "Son-in-law, what do you think about directly throwing in heavenly punishment?" Li Yi was startled. Isn't this a bit too much?" "It's not too much." Fang slapped his thigh and said, "I think this is a very good idea. It's simple and direct. Throw in a few heavenly punishments, and the people will think that it's New Year's firecrackers. Before daybreak we can just send the city guards over to clean up the mess. One shouldn't be too Fang. One should always leave a way out in the future. Throwing in a few heavenly punishments would not blow up the king of Shu or the bandits of the holy religion. It would blow up the productivity. Shu province was about to enter a stable stage of development. After things settled down here and the king of Shu and emissary of the right were defeated, they would officially start marching into the land of chaos. At that time they would be most lacking in manpower. Therefore these people couldn't be blown up. It's better to prepare archers," Li Yi said after some thought. Fang looked at him and asked, "What if they put up a fierce resistance and would rather die than surrender?" Li Yi thought for a moment and added, "Prepare more heavenly punishments as well just in case." Throughout the year, even the usually quiet and desolate Yong County would become lively and bustling. The liveliness reached a climax during the New Year's Day and then gradually subsided. It was only after the 10th day of the new year that there were signs of recovery. All the people in the city had to prepare for the upcoming Lantern Festival. Today was the 11th day of the new year. The streets in the city were not crowded. A few months ago, Shu province had lifted the curfew. However, due to the large number of people during the New Year's Day, it was difficult to maintain law and order. In the days before the Lantern Festival, people were not allowed to walk on the streets after midnight. At this moment it was still early. The shops and houses in the city were still brightly lit. However, outside the city most of the people had already gone to bed. 10 miles away from the west gate of Yong County, on the dark and difficult-to-walk mountain path, a crowd of people suddenly appeared. At the front of the crowd, Fang Yu looked at the person beside him and said in a low voice, "Tell them to hurry up. We have to hurry. We must reach the west gate before midnight." "Yes, Guardian." The person responded and immediately turned to walk to the back. On the other side, the king of Shu turned and asked, "Can your people in the city be trusted?" Fang Yu nodded and said in a deep voice, "Don't worry. There are some spies in the holy religion that only purple-clothed emissaries and above are qualified to contact. At midnight they will open the west gate. When that time comes we will march straight in. You lead the people and charge straight to the jianghu of Silla residence. We will be responsible for dealing with the guards in Yong County. We will meet outside the west gate in 2 hours." Chapter 1023. Hearing Fang Yu's words, the king of Shu nodded with a pleased smile on his face. This time they had mobilized more than 3,000 men, all carefully selected elites. Wouldn't it be a piece of cake to take down Yong County, which only had a few hundred soldiers? He finally had the chance to settle the score with that person. Fang Yu turned around and saw the king of Shu's ferocious face under the moonlight. He frowned and reminded, "Don't forget, we want to capture him alive this time. When we get the information we need, you can do whatever you want to him." He knew about the blood feud between the king of Shu and Li Yi. He was worried that the king of Shu would kill him in a fit of rage. If that happened, the holy religion would be in vain. They missed the chance to force the king of Tianfa to reveal the secret recipe last time, but they couldn't miss it this time. The king of Shu nodded and said eerily, "Don't worry, I can't bear to kill him so quickly. I want to bring him back and play with him slowly." After reminding the king of Shu, Fang Yu looked at the bald man on the other side and cupped his fists. "Commander Wang, the success of tonight's operation depends on you." Wang Wei smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about that. As long as you can fulfill your promise, leave the soldiers of Yong County to us. Ambassador Fong, do you still not believe in our strength and reputation? Wang Wei looked at him and said with a faint smile. Fong Yu cupped his fists again. Thank you, Commander Wang. I trust your reputation. The key to this operation was the 1,000 men led by the bald man. They were powerful and extremely difficult to deal with. Without them, the holy religion would suffer heavy losses. When the time came, they would be the vanguard, and the holy religion would just have to fulfill their conditions afterward. If there were any accidents and the holy religion suffered heavy losses, it wouldn't matter. The territories of these bald men in the fringe could be taken over by the holy religion. No matter what, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. At first he was worried that these baldies would easily agree to this and that there might be some kind of trap. But now that things had come to this, there was no turning back. If there was a trap, it could only be that they were colluding with the government and Li Yi. But an official and a bandit, a soldier and a thief, was this possible? Yong County West Gate. The curfew had arrived and the shopping malls were all closed. Only a row of soldiers carrying 2 lanterns patrolled back and forth. The West Gate was different from the other 3 gates. Once out of the gate, one would be at the foot of the mountain. There were very few pedestrians there, so the gate was not open all year round. Originally, there was no need for night patrols. Recently, because of the construction of a shopping mall here, they temporarily added such a team to guard against bandits. Late at night before the Lantern Festival, it was still very cold. Being blown by the cold wind, the patrolling soldiers walked more than a dozen laps and felt a little annoyed. However, this was their duty, not to mention that the team leader was still around, so they did not dare to relax at all. After an unknown number of laps, the person at the front signaled for everyone to stop and asked, "What time is it now?" One of them replied, "Sir, it should be almost midnight." "It's already at this time?" The team leader said, then turned around and said, "There aren't so many bandits in the city now. There's no need for so many people to be exposed to the cold wind here. How about this, the few of you go back and rest first. After 2 hours, come back and replace us." The people who were pointed out by him were stunned and immediately said, "It's better if the team leader goes back and rest first. We can still hold on." The team leader waved his hand and said, "If I tell you to go, just go. What's with all this nonsense? I still want to walk around a little longer and go back to sleep later in the night." At this point, those people no longer insisted. The captain was injured, so the patrolling of the West Gate was under the responsibility of Captain Su. Naturally, they had to obey his arrangements. The public security of Yong County was good now, and the patrolling was just a casual process. There would not be any major incidents. "Thank you, team leader." The few people nodded, cupped their hands at Captain Su and dispersed. When their figures completely disappeared, Captain Su looked in the direction of the city gate and murmured, "It's about time. Hurry up, don't delay the great emissary's important matter." He led a few figures through the shopping mall and hurried in the direction of the city gate. In the dense forest outside the western city gate of Yong County, a bald man looked at the city wall that was faintly discernible in the darkness and said in a low voice, "Hey, Envoy Fong, is the person you're talking about reliable? Can he be trusted? Will he stand us up?" Fong Yu did not look back. He looked in the direction of the city wall and shook his head. "Impossible. The people of my holy religion are loyal to Her Majesty. They are absolutely trustworthy. Loyal to Her Majesty." Wang Wei thought for a moment and asked, "Then why can't you contact those believers in Xuzhou?" Fang Yu's chest heaved and he said firmly, "Don't worry, Commander Wang. This time there will definitely be no problem." "That's hard to say." Wang Wei shook his head, looked at him and reminded him, "Brother Fong, don't blame me for not reminding you. The moral degeneration of the world is getting worse, and people's hearts are not what they used to be." His face was full of excitement as he shouted, "Follow me to the jianghu of Sila's residence and capture Li Yi alive. There's no need to go through so much trouble, I'm right here." A voice came from above. Suddenly, dozens of flames appeared on the city wall. Li Yi stood at the brightest spot on the city wall, looked at the king of Shu and said, "Come up here." Looking at the figure on the city wall that he could not see clearly, but he felt a sense of familiarity from the depths of his soul, the king of Shu's expression froze. Chapter 1024. Bang. After a heavy sound, the gate of the shopping mall, which was originally open, was closed. With the light of the fire, one could see that above the city wall were rows of densely packed arrows. In other words, they were surrounded by people. Seeing the densely packed figures on the city wall, especially the faintly discernible face in the fire that he would never forget. The King of Shu's expression changed drastically. He spat out the name through gritted teeth. I said to be careful of spies. Wang Wei led 1,000 people to block the city gate that they had just entered from. He looked at the King of Shu and shook his head. Your Highness, look, I didn't overthink, did I? 100 people go and capture Envoy Fang. Wang Wei looked back. Although he didn't know how Envoy Fang saw through them and escaped without entering the city, he couldn't let this big fish escape after planning for so long. Immediately, some people went out of the city gate while the rest closed the city gate. The King of Shu was stunned. After a long time he came back to his senses and looked at him. His eyes widened and he said in disbelief, You, I'm sorry, I'm a spy. Wang Wei looked at him and said, Your Highness, give up your fearless resistance and surrender. Beside the King of Shu, several people immediately shouted, Protect His Highness. They looked around and said loudly, Everyone don't panic. We have the numbers. Follow me and kill our way out. Kill our way out? Wang Wei looked at them and weighed something in his hand. He said, Do you know what this is? This is heavenly punishment. As long as I throw this out with a boom you will. F*ck who the F*ck ignited it. Seeing that the fuse of the thing in his hand was about to burn out, Wang Wei hurriedly threw the heavenly punishment out. Boom. Although he threw it at the corner of the wall, and the heavenly punishment was a low-quality version with limited power, more than 10 people in the King of Shu's group who were closest to it fell to the ground, moaning in pain. The fire in his eyes had yet to dissipate, and his ears were buzzing, mixed with the moans of the people around him. The power of the heavenly punishment made it so that no one dared to act rashly. If anyone dares to resist, I'll let you have a taste of heavenly punishment. Countless figures had already come down from the city wall, and a dense wave of arrows was aimed at the people in the middle of the open space. The King of Shu's face turned pale in an instant. There were originally 3,000 people in the allied army, but because there was a spy in the middle, it suddenly became 2,000 people. They foolishly rushed into the city gate, but were surrounded here like dumplings, unable to advance or retreat. Put down your weapons and surrender immediately. Fight for leniency. If you resist, kill without mercy. Wang Wei held a paper tube in his hand and shouted, Those who surrender, stand on the left. Those who don't, stand on the right. Everyone move, follow me and kill. Someone in the crowd had just said a few words when an arrow shot out from the front and hit him right between the eyebrows. The man fell to the ground and the people around him immediately scattered. Seeing this, Wang Wei's voice became cold as he said, If you resist again, you will be punished by the heavens. Everyone don't be afraid. We have the advantage in numbers. Follow me and kill. Among the crowd, another person revealed a fierce expression. However, just as he finished speaking, there was a commotion beside him. He saw that the surrounding people were avoiding him as if he was the plague and distanced themselves from him. Everyone knew that they were surrounded here and there was no way out. As long as the people above kept shooting arrows, they would be easily taken care of. Not to mention that the other party had the heavenly punishment divine weapon, which was extraordinarily powerful. If the other party threw one over, wouldn't they be implicated? At the city gate, Wang Wei had already lit an incense stick. He continued to raise his megaphone and shouted, Those who surrender, stand on the left. Those who don't surrender, stand on the right. Move, all of you, move. You only have 5 minutes. After that, immediately release the arrows. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a clamor of footsteps from the crowd. Wang Wei looked at the dense crowd and shouted, Yes, just like that. Put down your weapons, put your hands behind your head and squat. Not only did they not have the advantage in numbers, but they were also surrounded by the other party. Emissary Fang of the right was nowhere to be seen, and the holy religion was without a leader. Under Wang Wei's coercion, they could only stand on the left. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, the King of Shu looked at the remaining people around him and murmured, They're gone, they're all gone. Li came down from the city wall and walked to the King of Shu. The King of Shu looked at the few people around him, and then at the bald men pointing arrows at them. His gaze finally stopped on Li. At this time, it had been less than 4 years since they first met. He still remembered that their first meeting was at the Cold Mountain Temple. In the second year of Jinghe's reign, the plum blossoms in the Cold Mountain Temple were in full bloom. He stood together with Li Xian, whom he hated the most. From that time on, he didn't like this scholar of the Jing kingdom, who had just made a name for himself. At that time he was still the King of Shu, the prince closest to that position. He disregarded his feud with Li Xian and condescended to invite him to a banquet at the king's mansion. But what about him? He and Li Xian made a mess of his banquet, making him a laughing stock in the circle of the nobles in the capital. Then he beat him up in the palace in front of all the court officials, seriously injuring him and continued to get away with it. Then he uprooted his power in the court one by one. He drove him out of the capital. He made him get further and further away from that position, the position that he had dreamed of for more than 20 years. Then he extinguished his last shred of hope. The Chui family fell, his mother died, he became a fugitive, and he became the jianghu of Silla. He took over his fief and his mansion. Now he had finally found a chance to wash away the shame he had suffered. However, Li was standing right in front of him. They had never been so close to each other, nor had they been so far away from each other. The moment he met Li Yi, he missed his whole life. How good would it have been if he hadn't met Li Yi in the winter when the plum blossoms were in full bloom in the second year of Jinghe? However, there were no ifs. Cough, cough. The king of Shu bent over and couldn't stop coughing. He covered his mouth, but blood still seeped out from between his fingers. He suddenly pulled out a saber from the waist of a guard beside him and slashed at Li Yi. A crazed look appeared on his face. Li Yi, I'm going to kill you. Li Yi pinched the tip of the saber. No matter how much strength the king of Shu used, the long saber couldn't move an inch. He exerted a little force and the saber flew out of the king of Shu's hand. He casually threw it to the ground, making a crisp clang sound. The king of Shu's body fell limply to the ground. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He lowered his head and panted heavily. Haha, you traitors, I am the emperor. How dare you rebel? At a certain moment he suddenly raised his head and pointed at Li Yi. He took a few deep breaths and his face was no longer pale. Instead it turned rosy. He got up from the ground, put one hand on his waist and laughed wildly. Li Yi, jianghu of Silla, you are just a prince. Why don't you kneel before me? Treason, you are treason. I want to punish you for your crimes, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to exterminate your entire family. Li Yi looked at the crazed king of Shu and shook his head. He waved his hand and said, take him away. Don't touch me. The expression on the king of Shu's face became terrified. He shouted, you unruly people. Where is the imperial army? Guards. These unruly people want to harm me. Chapter 1025. On the morning of the 12th day of the first lunar month, Butcher Zheng opened the door with dark circles under his eyes and saw the waiter of the restaurant across the street sitting listlessly on the threshold. Butcher Zheng glanced at him and said, Hey Gooden, what did you do last night? Why are you so sleepy? The waiter glanced at him and said weakly, How dare you say that? If your wife hadn't screamed last night, the whole street would have heard her. How could I be so sleepy? If you two do that again next time. It's none of your business whether my wife screamed or not. Why can't you sleep? Butcher Zheng looked at him with a dark face and asked, Next time? What do you want to do next time? The waiter named Gooden was stunned. He looked at him and asked in surprise, Can I? Butcher Zheng picked up a boning knife and tilted his ear, asking, Come over here and tell me what you want to do. I just want to tell you that you must have public morality. Do you want me and my neighbors to go and play drums and cheer for you next time? The waiter shook his head. Butcher Zheng's wife was stronger than him. Even looking at Butcher Zheng was more interesting than looking at his wife. He stood up and said angrily, I don't know who it was last night who set off firecrackers in the middle of the night. It was so loud that I felt the bed move. I was woken up just as I fell asleep. Don't let me catch that bastard. If I do, I'll skin him alive. Butcher Zheng didn't care about the guy who set off firecrackers last night. He was also angry with that bastard. Yesterday he was preparing to have a baby with his wife. At the critical moment, he was scared out of his wits by the sound of firecrackers. Later he found his wits, but he was lost. He was only allowed to go to bed after being kicked a few times by his wife who hadn't had enough fun. Speaking of that person, Butcher Zheng was enraged. He waved the knife in his hand and said angrily, If I catch him, I'll cut his bones. Last night, many people in Yong County didn't sleep well, especially those near the West City Gate. A few days ago, when there was no curfew, everyone's nightlife would last until very late. These days, after the curfew, as soon as the sky turned dark, it was time to sleep. But regardless of whether they were sleeping or sleeping, they were all startled by the loud noise that occurred around midnight last night. The sound was so loud that even the ground beneath their feet shook. The first impression it gave people was that the sky had collapsed. Some people even mistakenly thought that it was an earth dragon turning over and hurriedly ran out of their houses. They stayed outside for most of the night and only dared to walk back into their rooms after seeing that nothing was out of place. During the day, everything returned to normal. The shops opened for business, and the commoners continued with their daily activities. Observant people would notice that a part of the city wall in the shopping mall was slightly charred, as if it had been burned. Most people only cursed the fellow who had fired the cannon in their hearts. Wang Wei didn't realize that he was responsible for firing the cannon last night. He stood in front of Li Yi, shook his head and said with some regret, "Prince, the rest of the people from the holy religion have been captured. 2 of the purple-clothed emissaries escaped, and that emissary Fang of the right has also escaped. I've already sent my brothers to their lair. This time their elites have all gone, so it'll be easy to wipe them out." Fang rubbed his shiny head and said regretfully, "Young master, I was too rash. I shouldn't have captured those fellows who opened the city gate yesterday. Otherwise, that Fang guy..." Halfway through his sentence he realized that his surname was also Fang, so he added, "That emissary of the right won't be able to escape." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's all right. If he escaped, then so be it. We'll meet again in the future. Let's talk about it next time." This time he managed to capture the king of Shu and the elites of the holy religion in the fringe without losing a single soldier. He also managed to capture more than 2,000 people. What else could he be dissatisfied with? Not only did emissary Fang of the right escape, but he also left the king of Shu alive. To him, the king of Shu was obviously more important than Fang Yu. Ever since he entered the capital, he and the king of Shu had never stopped fighting openly and secretly. It was only yesterday that their feud finally came to an end. However, even he didn't expect that it would end up like this. After experiencing the ups and downs of life, he never got up again. He fell many times, and when he finally got the chance to get up again, he fell from heaven to hell in an instant. The king of Shu actually went crazy. When he was taken away, he was still shouting things like, "Protect the emperor, rebel," and "There are always unruly people who want to harm the emperor." After he went crazy, he imagined himself to be the emperor. He had wanted to be the emperor all his life, and now his dream had finally come true. Although he was only deceiving himself, at least he succeeded. Fang touched his bald head again and asked, "Son-in-law, what should we do with the king of Shu?" Li Yi stood up and said, "I'll go see him first." After Li Yi left, Wang Wei looked at Fang and asked, "Brother Fang, is a bald head good to touch? How does it feel?" Fang nodded and said, "Not bad. Even if it feels good." Wang Wei removed the hand that was rubbing his head and asked, "Can't you touch your own head? You're crazy?" Fang glanced at him and said, "If I had a bald head, would I need to touch yours?" His words were eloquent and reasonable. Wang Wei opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to refute. The king of Shu was temporarily imprisoned in the manor prison. When Li Yi walked in, Qin Chong followed behind him and said, "The king of Shu has been making a big fuss since last night, calling himself we. Last night, while he was asleep, I had a doctor take a look at him. He said that his pulse is extremely chaotic. It should be because he suffered a huge psychological blow and his mind is injured. Perhaps he will wake up after a period of time, or perhaps he will be like this forever." How could he not be shocked? If the king of Shu had not suffered a psychological blow, then the one being imprisoned would be Li Yi himself. After saying a few words, Qin Chong looked at him and asked, "What do you plan to do with the king of Shu?" Li Yi looked at the innermost cell and said, "Send him back to the capital." In the innermost cell of the manor prison, the king of Shu placed his hands on his hips and raised his head. He looked at the people in the cell next door and said loudly, "You unruly people, why don't you kneel when you see us? Let us tell you, our reinforcements will be here soon. If you kneel before us now, we will get them to save you all in a while. Humph, you unruly people, how dare you not kneel when you see us? We will not get anyone to save you." The people in the cell next door leaned against the wall and sighed as they looked at the king of Shu, who was talking to himself. How could a normal person go crazy just like that? The king of Shu turned around angrily and suddenly saw a familiar figure. After a moment of shock, he immediately laughed wildly and said, Lord Qin, you're here. Are you here to save us?" "Haha, you unruly people, do you see that? Our reinforcements are here. Lord Qin is here to save us. It's not too late for you to kneel before us now." Looking at the king of Shu laughing wildly in the cell, Qin Chong stopped in his tracks. The expression on his face was extremely complicated. No matter what, the Qin family had been loyal to the king of Shu for a period of time. Seeing this scene, he felt a different feeling in his heart. "Lord Qin, quickly come and save us. When we return we will make you the prime minister. Tell us what you want to be and when we return we will make you. His gaze swept to the side, and when he saw the person standing beside Qin Chong, his expression changed drastically. He hid in a corner and shouted, "Li you traitor, you captured us, Yuan a rebel. Imperial father will not let you off, Imperial mother will not let you off, no one in the world will let you off." After shouting a few words he quickly ran over and grabbed the bars. With a face full of anticipation he said, Li, let me go. Let me go please. Don't you remember? Have you forgotten that I treated you to a meal? I even treated you to a meal. Seeing the king of Shu like this, Li's heart was also filled with mixed feelings. If he had known this would happen he wouldn't have done it in the first place. He just wanted to live a good life. Rui and the others. Whether the king of Shu became the emperor or not had nothing to do with him. If not for that meal, if not for Qin Yu, perhaps the two of them would not have such an ending today. The king of Shu knelt on the ground and said loudly, Li, let me go. Whatever you want, I can give it to you. At some point, a look of understanding appeared on his face and he said loudly, I know what you want. This emperor will give it to you, this emperor will give it to you, this emperor will give it to you. Release this emperor will immediately add an edict for Mingzhu to marry you. Let me go. Not only will I let Mingzi marry you, I will also let Li Xian marry you. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.